Hey guys, welcome back to the RCA RR-359B pre-war field test television restoration project. I know a whole lot more than I did when I made the last video installment. I want to share some of that knowledge, some of that information with you and point out more of the issues that I have discovered. Also, we had halfway decent lighting today. This is winter, been very overcast, and I've had a bit of trouble getting good quality video and photos of this set, but I think we're in luck right now. So, this is the upper chassis. We have controls along the top. Turn around here. Speed, horizontal centering, size, focus, size, vertical centering, and speed. So why we have two speed controls and why are they on either side? That is your horizontal and vertical hold. Speed is the speed of the free running oscillator. They're symmetrical. There's one oscillator on that side and one on that side. Horizontal centering and vertical centering alter the DC bias on the yoke. Yes, it's magnetically deflected. The yoke is down in there. These put a slight DC bias in the magnetic field, positive or negative, which will shift the whole image up, down, left, right. Size, vertical size, horizontal size. Focus. The way focus works is very strange. We'll talk about that when we get into the power supply. I want to focus this video on the upper chassis. So as I noted immediately when I got it, the tuner's missing. And that's what all these wires with blue labels went to a substitute tuner that was in the set that I don't have. The previous owner's looking for it. If he can find it, it may offer some insight into what modifications were made. Now, I do now have, courtesy of another collector, another owner of, I believe, two of these sets, I do have service info. And more. Get to that a bit later too, but I do have some schematics, some wiring diagrams. The trick with that is these sets were modified. Not only by whoever did this, but RCA was modifying them back when they were using these in their field test trials. So neither one of the schematic matches what I have exactly. Certainly not as it is because it's been modified, but also I'm not 100% confident that what I see matches this as it was the last time RCA tinkered with it. So I'll only fill you in a little bit more on that. I have absolute concrete proof that when this chassis was made, it had a 9-inch CRT, which was the early green phosphor CRT. And it was converted to a 12-inch by RCA. So it originally was an A, not a B. And I believe they made other changes as well. So that's where it gets into a little bit confusing about what. So this was originally an A, and it was turned into a B, and I have schematics for both. But they may have done additional tinkering after that. And then somebody did extensive tinkering on top of that. Continuing on with the tour of this, we have underneath the controls across the top, we have a deck with tubes along the top. We have tubes sticking out this way, and then we have tubes lying horizontally on the chassis. And there are some that are tough to see because of the CRT shroud. We have one at an odd angle down here, and then there's one flat going this way behind it. When this originally was a 9-inch, this was smaller and those were more accessible. When they added this, they really get obscured. So one thing I want to do is remove this, which will let me get a lot of access to everything. The problem is when you remove that, you no longer have support for the chassis. So it's got a leg coming down on either side with these that fit into the cabinet so it can be tilted out. And with the CRT shroud, which is pretty sturdy metal, it gives it support. Well, if I take this off, it's just going to fall over. Now, I do have a photo from some service, a binder It shows that they had a wooden jig to support this. So I'm going to cobble together something similar. So we'll have a piece of wood across the bottom, some vertical support. Basically just make a box with some flat feet on it so it won't tip either way, and then fit this into it. And I believe on the back side, yeah, we've got some mounting bolts. So ideally I'll have some kind of pockets for these to sit into, and then screw these into the frame. And then I mentioned getting a heavy-duty Lazy Susan so I can spin this around. That'll make it much easier to work on. So, I'd mentioned there were some things that you guys might not have realized about when I said that these were field tests and they were making changes, is this thing is modular to some degree. So this is the horizontal oscillator. It's a 6A6 dual triode, and inside here is a blocking oscillator transformer and a few discrete components. But notice it's mounted on a sub-assembly. Take these screws out and you can take this out. On the other side is where it was modified, and they put in a Thyratron. I'm sure that was to replace the vertical oscillator that went bad. Probably the blocking transformer went open. But the cool thing is, because I want to make this at least somewhat back to how it originally was, I want to take this out. I know what the missing one looked like. I can cut a piece of sheet metal, I can drill some holes, I can get a tube socket, put the 6A6 back in there, and come up with I'll use a modern blocking oscillator transformer. It should work fine, 60 hertz. And eventually, ideally, find a can to hide it inside of. So that'll take care of that. This is, oh yeah, so I was thinking it was modular. These oddly mounted things. So we have a tube up here, and then down below it is the IF transformer and associated components. And you align it, I believe, through the bottom. And these might unscrew. But I don't know if they're soldered after they're inserted, but it sure looks to me like you can take out a couple screws and then these pull out. There are sort of like slotted connector things that this slides into. Now the positive for me is that that's the most complicated part of this, and that appears to be untouched on that side or on this side. What has been monkeyed with are the deflection circuits and the power supply. At least that's what I'm going with for now until I know more. A few other things I noticed. There were some tubes missing up here. I went through my tube stash and I've been replacing them. These tube sockets are very fragile. I'm having to be careful when I remove or insert tubes. This one I think is okay, but some of them have cracks. And one of them is really busted on the power supply, so I think I'm going to be able to replace some of those. It means drilling out rivets, finding replacement sockets that look similar and replacing them, but I don't think I really have a choice in that. Now, why were some of these tubes missing? That I couldn't say, but I have a theory at least to why this guy was missing. So, a couple of them. So this was a mixer tube. The original was gone because they replaced the tuner, and I probably didn't need that anymore. Original tuner would have sat down right in here, and the tuner is very basic. Later today should be arriving a 3-section ganged variable capacitor frame from a Helicrafter shortwave receiver. At least for starters to experiment with, I'm going to try building a substitute tuner based on that. I had a 76 tube for the local oscillator, so and I have the schematic now. Not all the component values, but we can experiment with it. I think it'll be fun to try to make a Hartley or a Colpitts variable VFO and bandpass filter. So that's why it makes sense that this was missing, because the tuner plugs right into that, and whatever substitute tuner they used, I imagine didn't need this. This, though, was a bit odd. That was a damper tube. There is a damper tube, and it's a 1-V half-wave rectifier. But it was missing, and I think there were some wires down in there, down in the socket. Well, okay, I dug one up and I popped it in there, but then I noticed something else this morning that might explain why that wasn't there. I didn't notice this until just now as I was taking some photos of the chassis. A couple tubes have been added. It's hard to see with this tube shroud in place, but that is not original. There are a few other octal tubes in here, like this 6H6 down here is an octal tube, and that is original. But when I saw the socket style, it's markedly different, and they just used some flathead screws and some square nuts on the other side versus the other sockets are riveted. So that is very much not original. What is it? It's a 117Z6 half-wave rectifier. So we have two diodes in this versus the one in that, but what I'm thinking is then this might have been the damper tube. Because what I'm also realizing is when I'm looking at the dates and when these modifications might have been made, I've been trying to figure that out. This is from 1949. But this tube was introduced in, I think, 1940, so they were around. So a working theory I have is, as part of this, I was just chatting with a friend online, is who would have had this set? There weren't very many made. They went to RCA employees of these field trials. Okay, when those were over, maybe some of the sets got scattered around, but who would have had the knowledge and the insight to do anything with this, to tinker with it to that level where you're adding tubes and rewiring things? There were no Sam's Photofax for this thing, and there were very few of them in existence, so I figure like an RCA employee might have ended up with it and had it during World War II and kept it running with whatever they could scavenge during wartime. That they stopped production and they stopped tube sales and stuff like that. So maybe their 1V4 damper tube failed and they had one of these and they rigged it up to work as a damper. And the 117 means this filament can run directly off the AC line, no power transformer needed. There's a 117 volt filament. So it wouldn't have had to interfere with any of the existing tube filament wiring. How about the other tube? Well, here it is. It's a 6H6. RCA introduced these metal tubes in the 30s, so these were available, and as I said, there's two others, so that's an original one, and there's one on the flip side. Don't see a date code on it, though, but maybe that marking can be deciphered. It looks like V4E, maybe. What this would have been for, I'm not sure. And it was done in a different style. Oh, hang on. There's writing. Extra. Okay. I think it's wired up, but I'll have to double check. Maybe it's not wired, and they just put it in there as a spare tube holder for the other two 6H6s. I don't know. Hey, something else. So the writing on these, the 5, 6, 7, 8, pretty sure that's original because those are the numbers in the service info for those tubes. So how weird is that? So that's the good. This appears to be unmolested original, this stuff, which of course is the bulk of the set. But let's take a look on the other side. Here's where things get a bit uglier, more confusing, and I'm going to have to really carefully document and go through everything to figure out what the heck is going on. So we know the tuner was up here, and that's dial light, which I actually still have the original dial light. That's nice. And as several of you pointed out on my Patreon, the tuner was not a direct drive. The tuner sat up here, and it had a dial on it, and the outer rim of that went to the tuning shaft. So the tuning shaft wasn't up here like it would be in line with the gang tuning cap. Tuning shaft is down here and all that's gone. So if I want to replicate it, I'll show you that tuner when it arrives. I'll need to add another mechanism down below it, a bracket and an extra shaft. And I imagine they did it so you had a large wheel up here and then a small one down here, and that would give you a vernier action, gear reduction, so you could more finely tune it. Wow, that is one. That's 14 gauge, like house wiring, but old-timey house wiring, which actually is interesting to see. So what I've been trying to do is figure out who, I'll never know exactly who, but who might have had the knowledge to make these modifications and when were they done. So far, everything I've seen points to the late 40s. For example, we got an added cap down here, one of the few parts that's dated, and that is 44. So this set was made originally in 36, probably modified to a B in 37. They did their field trials. After that, it went to somebody who kept it around in the late 30s, early 40s, and World War II happened. And they did continue to tinker with, experiment with television during the war, and there were broadcasts in the New York area at least. So it's not, or it seems likely that somebody got their hands on this and had it at home and did whatever they could using whatever they could find to keep it running, because how rare a thing it was to have a working TV during World War II. Once the war was over, I imagine this was laughably obsolete and wasn't used anymore. Because one thing I've been wondering about is the specs on this are so different from the NTSC standard that was started being used in 45, 46, that it seems without doing extensive modifications of the IF, this couldn't have worked with an NTSC modern standard. And as I say, these IF cans don't appear to be mucked with. So I'm thinking somebody during the war, I don't know, at some point they transitioned from 441 line to 525. But this set could work on 441 with AM sound modulation. The big issue I see is that the spacing between the video and audio carrier in this set is only, I think, 2.5 megahertz versus the 4.5 later. I can't imagine this has enough range that you could space them out that widely without opening up these cans and changing component values, and that does not appear to have been done. So here we can see one of those modules sticking through where it's got the tube on top and the coil at the bottom, and here's what I meant about how they kind of plug in. So that's why I don't know if these are soldered, or if I take out a couple screws up here, can I pull this? Does it unmount? Can I pull it out? You can see there's another one there, another one there, another one there, and none of that stuff has been messed with. And one up here. So the most complicated, finicky stuff in this set appears to all be original. There's the mixer tube I replaced. I don't think they messed with the can underneath it that has the delicate coils and trimmers and stuff like that. In other words, it looks like they only added stuff. They didn't tear what was there apart, except for the vertical oscillator, which must, as I say, much have failed. So none of this stuff's original. So that tube socket, these two caps, that part, this dog bone, none of that's original. I'm going to take it all out. Now let's talk about some of the other stuff I discovered. Down here, this looks so much cleaner in our service info. That's the added tube, that's the added tube, and yeah, this is the one that says spare, and yeah, it's absolutely wired up. It says spare what? I don't know. But, hey, sorry for the canine interruption. Dogs want to know what's going on. Alright, so down here, look at the original service info. These two tubes are in here, and there's a couple can domes along the bottom and nothing else. It looks so much cleaner. That's why I know all this stuff was added. Two tubes added, all these power resistors were added, this electrolytic was added, this little terminal strip here was added. It looks like they added that so they could run some parts over the tube socket that was added. I'm inclined to remove all this stuff. Also, here, noted this wiring, and there's a splice in here. It's that super crispy natural rubber wiring. Sorry to disturb an original wire, but the stuff has to go. And this, done this in some Philco radios from the late 30s. It's horrible stuff. But my question is that original or not? Because some of the wiring is cloth. So I've been trying to look around. I got better lighting. I can see the areas where I said were undisturbed. They're all rubber wiring too. It's actually good for me because I've been speaking with some colleagues about whether or not to use cloth-covered wiring and where I could find some that's appropriate. But more, now that I'm seeing this in good light and really reviewing it, it looks like about 75% of the wiring is that natural wire. which is, I'm pretty sure is not made anymore. So I think I would be it'd be perfectly reasonable for me to replace that with modern PVC insulated wiring. In fact, I think it would be counterproductive to replace it with cloth wiring if it wasn't cloth wiring to begin with, just to make it look old-timey. But clearly some of it was. Which makes me wonder, like in 36, when this was originally probably made, when it was a 9-inch, was it all cloth? And when they converted to 12, did they do rubber wiring? Probably not, because they wouldn't have had to mess with this stuff. Interesting. Now, something else that has been added is that the stuff isn't original. Got an electrolytic back there. This can that was floating around. Bam, 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 bam. None of those should be there. And I was thinking, oh, well, those must be there to replace original caps that went bad. But no, there were no electrolytics up here, except for there was one little box down here, which is gone, a metal box that had 2 electrolytics in it. I think an 8 and a 12, something like that. So there should be 2 electrolytics up here, not 10 or so that we have right now. So all those I intend to remove. So why would they have added so many? Well, there are some filter caps on the main power supply, the other chassis. 2 of them have been replaced, 2 are originals, and those are really early type caps that had a high failure rate. I think the originals probably had liquid inside of them, borax solution or something like that. So it seems very likely by the 40s that those would all have been open. And that chassis weighs a ton. It's not easy to work on. So they might have just left those open bad caps on the main power supply and tacked these in to filter the power supply up top, where it's a much easier chassis to work on. But the unfortunate thing is, to do that, looks like they would say cut into the wire, scrape some of the insulation off, loop it around the caps. So, yeah. That being said, the service info does show you, I do have a wiring diagram, like a very nice like 3D artist rendering of how all the wiring went and what color all the wires were originally. So, at least in terms of making it, the detailed stuff I believe is only for the 9-inch version, but it's a delight just to have that even. But I do have a pretty good guide that I can, assuming it's accurate, put the wiring back exactly how it was originally with the right colors and running the wires in the right place, because I don't think they would have been this loose and sloppy. The cloth covered wires, like you can see here, are nicely laced and they put in tube sleeves and stuff like that. But this is a little ugly, and obviously this is a mess going to nothing. Okay, we have solved one mystery. So when I got this, I noted that there were some wires coming out and going to an AC plug, but there's also an AC plug on the lower chassis. This, boy, I mean, somebody was thrifty, all right, because we have a few inches of wire spliced with ancient cloth electrical tape going to another wire that was spliced into yet another wire that went to an AC plug that plugged into the wall just to power the filament on that 117Z6. Crazy. Now, I've been focusing a lot on this area because this is a critical part of the power supply. They show 4 can domes in the service info, but I see 2 on here, and in the photos I have of some chassis, they show 2, so I'm a little not unsure about that. But I can say that this doesn't quite match up to what I see in another photo of this chassis bottom. Like the lug spacing is different, and I noticed that this end of this can dome is not secured to anything. So I don't think either of these are original. And it's complicated. It's a huge bleeder resistor divider between B plus and the negative rail with 15 or so power resistors all tapped to create dozen plus voltages that get scattered all throughout the set. And they're somewhat oddball resistor values, but I spent some time yesterday finding close modern equivalents. So both of these are going to have to go. I want to clear out all this stuff and fabricate new candome resistors with as close as I can get to the original values, and then restore all the wiring. So that is a very daunting task there. And what is this crazy heavy wire going to? Ah, it's just ground. Okay. So for some reason, to ground the tuner, they went all the way down here. I think they could have used a nice blob right there, which also goes to a heavy wire that was clipped off and going to nothing. Oh, I gotta check that out, because when I first saw, this might be like an early form of crude coax, or is this just, boy, it's super crispy. Let me chip away at this insulation a little bit. I'm trying to figure out, was this a wire to carry a signal into the tuner, or was this just a ground wire for who knows what? No, that is just some old-timey stranded wire, like 14 gauge stranded, with gutta percha insulation covered with cloth versus solid core. But these are both just heavy ground wires. That's it. Don't know what they were going to or what they were used for. So that's some of the ugliness. Now, when I said that it seems that they just added stuff, this terminal strip with parts on both sides going all down here, and this one down here, look to me to be 100% original. Got some paper caps, we got some dog bones on both of these. I think we got a trimmer cap down here. That 100% original. I think the controls are all original except this one, because this shaft looks kind of odd. But it's an old control, so I'm not 100% about that. And then we have this guy up here, which might be bypassing this control. I think that might be a coarse frequency adjust. And yeah, we got one on this side too, so I'm pretty sure that's what those are. So coarse, frequency, and then fine. Which confirms what I heard, that these have a pretty wide range. So to go to from, I think they're originally 334 lines, then to 441, and then maybe you could do 525. I've heard that yes, these oscillators have enough range, like on a horizontal oscillator, to handle, say, 10 kilohertz to 15 plus kilohertz, no trouble. So that's cool. Yeah, I'm gonna get a good look at this too. This is the horizontal oscillator. That strip there, this kind of looks like this might, if I remove the screws, that it might pull out without having to disconnect wires. Like there's a connector strip there. Interesting. Wrapping up the chassis tour, we have some big cables coming out the bottom. These go to a terminal strip on the power supply chassis, and these look to be all original. Bit frayed, it's all cloth covered. It's very tempting for me to just dive in and start clipping stuff out, like these heavy wires, like this. This is the AC power for that tube socket, just to get it all out. But before I do that, I do want to at least attempt to trace out what this goes to. So my working theory is that this was a damper tube. Well, I want to see what these wires are actually going to. Not many. So, other than the AC line, it looks like we only have one wire coming out. I think they paralleled up to two sections. They grounded one of them. So whatever this wire goes to, that will solve the mystery of what this tube is for. It goes to a terminal strip, goes to a wire, crunchy, and then it goes into this wiring harness. So I'll have to get a continuity meter and trace out what that actually goes to confirm if it's the damper. Well, where would the damper need to go? It would need to go up in this area. This is the push-pull 42 outputs to drive the whole horizontal winding. Now remember, there's no flyback in this, but it does. Let's talk a little bit about the picture tube. Now, as I said originally, this was a 9-inch converted to a 12, but not the 12 that I have. It would have been a bit more bulbous, and it would have fitted snugly against these, so I've been told. The one I have appears to be a prototype 12AP4, which should work fine. The mounting's a little bit different from what we're used to. It has a knob coming out near the base of the funnel for the high voltage, and the way this worked is it just pressed against this down here. There was no cap or anything that snapped over that, no rubber boot. It just pressed against this. And on the other side of that goes to this wire, which is your high voltage cable. Cloth covered, rubber insulated. Not sure how robust that is. And the yoke is down in there. It's electrostatic focus, so we have no focus coil. This comes off fairly easily. We have a couple screws up here. This one's already loose because I was starting to take it off when I realized that this thing would tip over once I did. But with this out of the way, it's going to be way easier to see all that's going on and be able to get at everything. The wires for the yoke and the CRT socket are all coming down in here. It's a bit complicated. And one curious thing I was clued in about this. This is the CRT socket. There's a switch in the middle of this. There's a normally open push button switch. That goes to an AC interlock. If that button is not pressed in, the set won't turn on. So if you don't have this, if you don't have a CRT in there and that plugged into it for safety or some such, maybe because it wouldn't drain off the high voltage, they put that interlock in there. A rather unique feature. And there are a few other safety interlocks that I think have been defeated in my set. The set that originally have a back, and I believe there was an AC interlock on the back, and there might have been one on that front panel that pulls off. So there were several interlocks, and I think they've been bypassed in mine because I don't have the back. And this push button doesn't feel great, so I'm not sure how healthy that is. But it looks like this opens up pretty easily, and I may need to replace some of these wires because they're crispy, crunchy, and we got some old electrical tape around it. So now these are cloth wires and nicely laced and sleeved, a custom wiring harness. So if I do have to monkey with this, I will try to restore this. This one I'm not crazy about keeping. This is your high voltage. So ancient, crispy, crusty wire. This is probably the focus because it's also high voltage-y looking. Especially since they're mostly, well, certainly the high voltage would be completely hidden inside here. I'd feel a little better about using modern high voltage rated wire in place of that. I don't think it's too sacrilegious. Because I'm far more concerned about a short developing and taking out an irreplaceable part than I am what the wires look like. That's my thinking. As for the tubes that were missing up here, I dug up some replacements and put them in. I'm ready to put one in there. I've been spraying a little bit of WD-40 on the tube pins, it seems to be helping out a lot to reduce the chance of the, so it just goes very smoothly. I think the problem is, especially these where there were no tubes, is those pins got corroded and tubes don't slide in and out very easily. I think that's enough for now. I'm going to continue with my poking and photographing and research and work on building up a jig for this. Next time, maybe we'll take a look at the power supply. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.